So, I'm not exactly what you would consider to be a flower kind of person. Um, since I was a little kid, my mom loved macro photography and she loved flowers, and she's always told me I should take flower pictures because she thinks I'm a really great photographer and she loves flowers and she wants to see what I can do with it. But it's just not my thing. I don't really enjoy flowers because usually, well, one is flowers, and it's just, I'm not a flowery kind of guy, but usually an image looks very similar to this. It's just really bright and really vibrant, and it just doesn't really do much for me. Especially when you go to these like super fancy gardens and the flowers are planted and they're not wildflowers. And this one in particular you're looking at is a wildflower, but it's kind of bland. It's stuff like this where it kind of reminds you of something you would have seen at your grandmother's house. Something like that. Oh, where did my image go? But something I've been seeing a lot of recently on social media is this kind of desaturated and muted look to flower photography. Something starkly contrasts to the super saturated, super vibrant, super bright photography. And so what I wanted to do in this video today, because I obviously with that moodiness, and that's kind of my thing, my niche. I think I messed that word up in another video. My niche, whatever you want to call it, is that kind of moody, surreal, kind of desaturated tone. I just really like that photography. I think it's a lot better on the eyes than something like this. This is a little too bright. It's not really that pleasant to look at. So what I'm going to do today is show you how to take an image like this, just a standard flower like this, and turn it into something a little more like this desaturated, moody kind of look, something a lot more, in my opinion, pleasing to the eye while still being a flower and still really pretty. So we're going to walk you through the steps today to show you again. Let me show you from this down to this. So let's get started. So here's the image. This one is a little overexposed. I think I would have rather had it a little less exposed than this. There is some areas right here that are just a little too bright, but that's okay because I'm going to be able to bring a lot of that down here in Lightroom. So the first thing I'm going to do, go to the lens correction, and I always click on remove chromatic aberration. I don't know if it's going to do anything for this picture, but I'm going to do it anyways. And then we're going to jump up here into the basics tone. So the first thing I'm going to do, I don't need it any warmer, especially since I'm going to be bringing that saturation down. I don't want it warm. I kind of want that cool look to it. We're going to bring the highlights down a pretty good bit. This one, like I said, is a little overexposed, so I'm going to go ahead and bring those highlights all the way down. Now I'm also going to bring the shadows pretty high up, just so that when we start to bring the rest of the background around here down and darken that up, that we still have some detail here in the flower. So we're going to bring those shadows all the way up. I'm going to go down here to the whites, hit the Alt button, hold the Alt button, click on your slider here. I'm just going to move this over until I see a little dot. That's too much. Tiny little dot on my screen. Black, same thing. Hit Alt, hold Alt, click on the slider, and I'm going to bring this down a good bit, seeing those dots kind of show up. And you can already see there's a big difference there than where we were. I'm going to bring the clarity way up. Normally I don't bring the clarity this high up, but as we start to kind of mute stuff, I want the details. So I'm going to bring the clarity, I'm just going to go ahead and bring the clarity all the way up. And now we're going to jump up here to contrast. And we're going to bring contrast up a good bit as well. That's going to start to darken some of that background. And now I know it's super, super saturated here, but we're going to go ahead and take care of that right now. Jump down to your vibrance and slowly bring that down a little bit. I don't want to bring it down too much. And I'm going to bring down the saturation a little bit as well. I'm not going to bring that down as far as the vibrance, because if I do, what I'm going to do is take out all the color in the image, and I don't want that. So right about there looks pretty good. And now I'm going to go ahead and bring the exposure down just a hair. I don't want to bring it down too much, because once we jump into the tone curve, that's really where we're going to start bringing in the darkness into this image. So I'm just going to bring it down. I think that's pretty good. So you can already start to see some of that moodiness coming in. and the desaturated look coming in. So now let's jump down into the tone curve. The tone curve is really probably the most important part to kind of getting that desaturated, that kind of crushed black social media kind of look, I guess you could say, that's really popular right now on Instagram. I'm going to go over here to the highlights. First off, make sure that you are in manual mode. Click on this little icon here. If you see it, if it looks something like this, where you have highlights, lights, darks, shadows, and these little points down here, just go down here and click, and it'll take you into the linear mode, and it is manual. It's the RGB. Make sure that you are in the top one, the RGB. You don't want to be down in the red, green, or blue. We're not going to mess with that in this image. So we're going to go up to this point right here. This is the highlights, and we're going to bring that down a pretty good bit. There we go. And then we're going to jump down here to the shadows, and we're going to bring that up a pretty good bit as well. Now I'm going to drop a point. There's these intersecting lines right here. I'm going to drop a point on this line, and I'm going to bring that down, and that's going to give you the contrast. That might be a little too dark. This is where you just kind of play around a little bit. As it gets dark, you can bring your lights up a little bit. You can maybe go back into your basics. Maybe we have it a little too underexposed. So I'm going to click. Let's bring that up just a hair. And it really is just kind of little tweaks here and there. Bring those blacks up just a little bit more. Drop that down a little bit. That's too much. Bring my highlights up just a hair. I think I got it a little too dark. So once again, back up into basics. You know what? Let's just go ahead and bring the exposure all the way up. And I think that's about it for now. You can always come back up into this. There's really, it's not a science. You know, it's a photograph, so it's what's most pleasing to your eye. But really crushing those blacks, but still bringing a little bit of that shadow down is what's going to keep a lot of that contrast and not completely flatten out your image. And then just kind of tweaking the highlights and your exposure, going back and forth until you get an image that you're starting to like. You don't want it so dark that you can't see the flower, but again, you also don't want it so bright that it's just super, I don't know, 80s flower photography. Some of you might understand what I mean when I say that. And I think that's about it with the tone curve. So what we want to do, jump down here into the HSLR color, all that kind of good stuff, and we're going to start with the saturation. There is no red in this image, as you can see, moving the slider back and forth, and there is not really affecting anything. So I'm not going to mess with the red, but there is some orange and yellow here in the middle of the flower, and I do want to bring that saturation up just a hair because I want to make that pop, both the orange and the yellow. I'm going to bring that up. Let's bring the yellow up to where the orange is, close to it. Perfect. Okay, so that did saturate it, but here in a minute we'll jump into Luminance and kind of bring that down a little bit. Now these petals are kind of a strange color. They're a little, they got some blue tint in them, they got some purple tint in them. I don't really want to bring that up. If you bring the blue up and I bring the purple up, and then you're just, you know, what's the point in desaturating everything and having that kind of flat, moody image? So actually what I want to do is bring the blues down. Let's bring the purple down and see if maybe I brought the blues down a little too far. Just a hair on these. Yeah, I brought the blues way too down way too far. Just a hair. Bring them down. Desaturate it just a little bit more. You can kind of see here on the buds around this flower. I don't think the magenta is going to do too much. Nope. And now we're going to jump over into Luminance. So I actually want to bring the oranges up just a smidge. No. Let's bring the oranges down a little bit. Let's bring the yellows up just a hair. I don't want it too bright. And then we're going to bring the blues down, and that's going to make those petals pop. And we're going to bring the magentas down, and that's going to make those petals pop. It's also going to darken it up just a little bit, which is why I wanted to bring the yellows up just a hair, not too much, just to kind of have some kind of light here, because this is where I want your eye to go when you look at this image. This is the main subject, so I want it to be a little brighter than everything else around it. These highlights may be a little bit too much, so let's go back up in here and just kind of see what happens when I tweak the exposure. Yeah, I'm going to drop it down to negative 0.10. It brought it down just enough, I think. But that's going to be it right here for this panel. Details, I do want to make sure this is sharp. I go ahead and click this little icon right here, find a good spot where you can see a good bit of the, obviously not a good bit of the image, but a good detailed part of the image. And so for me, that's going to be the center. And I'm going to bring the sharpening up like I always do in just about every image. I just feel like this is kind of a good base place, and that's 70, or as close to 70 as possible. You bring it up too much, and you can kind of see right here it gets super grainy. It kind of brings out the natural grain of the image anyways from your camera. So 70 is pretty good. It still looks a little grainy, so I'm going to go down to Luminance, and I'm going to bring that up to 40, or as close to 40 as my mouse will let me. And that's going to smooth it out a little bit. And you can see there's actually a pretty significant difference, or well, maybe it is for me. But again, if you bring the luminance up too much, you're just going to smooth everything. It just doesn't look natural in my opinion. So 40 is kind of that magic number. 70 and 40 is kind of that magic number for me. Unless I'm trying to make it grainy, and in this image, you actually probably could. Let's try that out for just a second. Let's turn that luminance down. Bring that up. Bring the radius up. I don't want it to be big. So you could kind of have it grainy, and since it's kind of moody, it's not going to distract too much. So let's kind of keep that and do this last part here and see what that looks like. So now we're going to jump down to effects, and I'm going to bring the haze up. If you bring the haze down, that's what you got. If you bring it all the way up, it's really funky looking. So I'm just going to bring that up just a little bit, and what you're going to see is the background will be the most affected by this, unless you bring it all the way up. And so that's what I want to do, because I want to darken this background just a little bit more so that this flower pops. But I don't want to lose these buds, because I actually kind of like that in the image. So we're going to bring the haze up just a bit. You can kind of see that it's darkening the background, and that's good. And then we're going to go up to the highlight property. This is your vignetting. And we're going to bring this down a little bit. Not too much. I think that's pretty good. As I'm bringing it down and darkening everything, I'm starting to see how bright this midpoint is. So we're going to jump back up into this panel and maybe bring those yellows down a little bit more. I think that's pretty good. So I did bring it down further than I originally thought. Back down to the vignetting really quick. I like bringing up. I don't like a harsh circle. If you see, you drop it all the way down, you get this harsh circle. I don't like that at all. It reminds me of my childhood. I grew up in the 80s, and the 80s photography, actually the 80s photography was more like that. Let's bring that feathering up. You'd have that really awful haze. Oh, this bad flashback. So let's get out of this real quick. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down, and I'm going to bring the feathering up, and that simply just softens that vignetting a good bit, and I kind of like that. It looks a lot more natural. And then I'm going to bring the midpoint in. The midpoint's going to bring the vignetting a little bit more towards the center. But I don't want to bring it in too much, because, again, I don't want to lose these buds. There we have it. So we have a very muted, very desaturated look. I still think the highlights here are a little more than what I would like, but the sun was quite bright, and I started a little more exposed than what I normally would. So this was a virtual copy. Let's see how close we got. Actually, this is a little darker, a little less flat than my original edit here. I think I prefer this one. I think is a little more pleasing to the eye. That's why I love doing these videos with you guys, because sometimes, you know, I always go in and I kind of pre-edit everything and see what I like, and then when I come in here, I can kind of tweak things a little bit different. And sometimes going back and re-editing an image you've already edited, you see things differently than when you initially did it, and you end up with something a little bit more pleasing. So here again, this is where I was at. This is where we were. Our goal was, and you can see this is a lot flatter than where we just went through. And if you like that flat look, that's where the tone curve, you can actually bring this up a little bit. Really kind of bring those blacks up. Drop those highlights, and that's going to flatten everything out. But yeah, I don't like that. So we're going to bring those highlights back up. Bring this up a little too much. And I think that's pretty good. I think that's where it's at. But that's how you kind of get that moody, natural nature kind of look that you're starting to see a lot of people use on Instagram and other social media sites. I just like it. I like it a lot more. I think it's really attractive. It's almost fine art in fine art-esque in its own kind of way. You could really, if you want to do fine art, you could really blacken out this background, but I really like it. I like the spider webs. I like the buds popping out too. But it kind of is starkly contrasted to what you would see from most what's stereotypical flower pictures where it's just super bright and vibrant. I just like this. I think it tells more of a story. It's way more appealing to the eye. But anyways, that's it before I go rambling on. I really hope you guys like this video. Try this with flowers and just, keep playing with the tone curve like you saw me doing. One of the good things, and this is the last thing, and I'll leave it at this, but one of the good things about editing flowers is they're very, very colorful. And so one of the things you're really going to learn while using this in Lightroom, whether you're just beginning or whether you're a pro, you're going to really learn what the different panels do to color. You're going to be able to see where the tone curve goes, what it does to the different types of colors, different types of textures. Of course, when you get into your saturation and luminance, what that's going to do to color. It really teaches you a lot. It's taught me a lot, and I'm able to go and use the techniques I've learned by doing flowers like this into my other aspects, or my aspects of my other types of photography, like landscape and so on and so forth. So really kind of play around with it. Don't bypass the flowers just because you might not be a flower person, because you can definitely make it your own, and it just ends up being a really awesome shot. So if you like this video, make sure you mash that thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell next to the channel name. That's going to give you the notifications every time I upload videos. Really appreciate you guys watching this. Feel free to share this with anybody you think might enjoy this tutorial, and I'll see you guys in a future video.